Thank you for joining me on A Commitment to Reality. I had a fantastic conversation with Frederica Mathewes-Green, and I can't wait for you to hear it right now. All right, Frederica,
Hi, Dave. It's good to see you again.
so good to see you. I'm so excited to do this, and I'm so excited to do this with you. Before we start, I just want to start by thanking God for you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, dear Lord.
I
Well,
mean, from the moment that we met, you've been so encouraging to me. If I ever have any questions, you're gracious with your time, and I couldn't think of a better person to start this journey with.
well, thank you, Dave. I'm honored that you would choose me to start the journey. I hope I can be as good as you apparently think I am.
We'll see. No. I had a different way that I wanted to start, but just out of curiosity, what went through your mind when you saw the phrase "a commitment to reality"?
I thought, I'm not sure what that means. And I thought, as an Orthodox person, I guess actually as almost any Christian these days, we are seeing the decline of scientism, as if science cancels God. That idea is on its way out. But unfortunately, the new idea coming in is people are crazy about going to haunted houses, using tarot cards and crazy things like that. So what we would hope as Christians is to draw them to actual reality where the spiritual realm is definitely real and it
Mhm.
infuses our entire material realm. It's around us all the time. Evil forces are seeking to influence us. It's good to be aware of that. So when I think of reality, I think that's what reality is. And here we have the whole culture on this kind of making this sudden turn from science is God to anything goes and let's play around with it. And we're trying to halt them right there in that corner and say, let's pay attention to reality. Let's make sure you know what you're getting into. Is that what you had in mind? Because as I said, at first I thought, I'm not sure what that means. I'm just guessing that's what you mean.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. More than anything, I think the vital word is commitment,
Hmm.
because reality exists whether you accept it or not. And we live in this time where people are so scared to challenge somebody else's conception of reality, right? You've got your truth and I have
Yes,
my truth. And to contradict your conception of truth is anathema,
yes,
right? It's offensive.
right,
And
right.
this whole thing where, to be loving and kind is to accept. And as parents, both of us know that that's not always loving and kind.
No,
Sometimes you need to rebuke with love,
yeah.
but to say that's not really how reality is.
An
And
analogy that I often go to is if you have a friend or relative whom you really love and they smoke cigarettes, there's an
yeah,
appropriate time to rebuke. You will be doing that in love because you're concerned for them, but
mhm.
you can name something they're doing that is harming them. So I feel the same way about encountering someone who's using a Ouija board or trying to predict the future. They're doing something that's dangerous. As you say, though, it's offensive when you call that out and when you deny that everybody can have their own reality. I wonder if it'll just take tragedy, you know? Is it just gonna take repeated tragedy for people to understand how dangerous this whole field is? And apparently that's the situation that was going on in the time of the early church in the Roman Empire. And the thing that was so distinctive about Christians was that evil spirits obeyed them and that in the name of Jesus, evil spirits would flee. But they were already at least to the point where they recognized there is such a thing as evil spirits, and our culture has not quite gotten there yet. I think they will. Sad to say.
Yeah, so like I said, the emphasis being on commitment was what really drew me in, and the phrase caught in my head
Mm.
a couple of years ago. Reality exists, and we need to commit to it, because if we don't, there's no limit to the ridiculousness of how our lives will be. And I think we're seeing that on some level in modern culture. Kind of the
Yes.
listlessness. When you live outside of reality, I feel like I don't think it's out of bounds to say that there's a collective unease. that we're all experiencing, that we all kind of can tell that something's not quite right. And I think that my assessment is that we have lost touch with reality.
Now, as you're talking about this, I think it actually connects to the epidemic of loneliness. That is, if everybody has their own personal reality and they're going to be defensive about that and proud about that, they are essentially rejecting community reality. And that's what you mean by commitment, that it's not just a commitment to my own imaginary reality. It's that you and I are facing the same reality. And,
Uh-huh.
we can say, do you see this going on? And you say, yeah, I see that too. That because we have the mind of Christ, the nous of Christ, we're going to see the same things. And I think that's the deeper thing going on in our culture is people wanting to be independent and not be part of a community, wanting to indulge themselves. And advertising just pushes this constantly. You're this unique individual. So buy this mass produced product and prove how unique you are. It's just crazy. But they are a prey to that because it feeds their pride. And I'm afraid it will take some hard lessons before they realize there actually is a real reality. And we know it's real because we all share it and then be attracted back to that. I think that's part of the problem we're facing. Commitment to community reality, shared reality
Something outside of yourself.
outside of
We're completely atomized.
yes, yes, something that exists just like the visual world out there that we can all agree on. We hear the same things. Our senses perceive the same things. The self-indulgence is very, very attractive, but it's important to bond with others. It makes you human. And
Oh yeah.
forsaking loneliness to share that commitment to reality. Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a lot to explore there, isn't there, in
Yeah.
those
Well,
three
it's going to be a
simple
journey.
words?
So,
Yeah, you'll be learning more and more about it, but there's wisdom there in that little package.
well, we dove right in, but for anybody that's not familiar with you, I could sit here and read your Wikipedia and talk about your list of accomplishments and all the books that you've written, and they're wonderful. But I also find that to be slightly reductive. I always felt very uncomfortable with the American conception of when you meet somebody, okay, you start with name,
Oh,
but then the second question is, what do you do?
me too.
As though that's who you are.
Yeah, yeah.
And what you've done, what you've accomplished is noteworthy, but I don't know that that's exactly what you would contextualize as who you are. So if you could introduce yourself to the audience, what's your story?
I've always felt a little sympathy to that question, what do you do? Because I think what it really means is what are you interested in? What do you like? What attracts you? And what you do to like make money and pay the bills may not be that thing. It may be something totally different. So if the question were something like, what is dear to your heart? I would say for me, it's the Lord Jesus Christ. I was very antagonistic to Christian faith in college and in high school, and I had a very dramatic conversion where when I was touring Europe, I was in a church, I looked at a statue of Jesus, and he just spoke to my heart so suddenly and so profoundly that I'm like I'm like an addict. I need more Jesus all the time. And I realized that that was not only a miracle, but that somehow changed who I was, what I care about, what I love, what's dear to my heart. It was like being struck by lightning, I guess. And so
Hmm.
the thing that's most important to me is the Lord Jesus Christ and getting closer to him. I'm not just reading about him, not just reading theology, but somehow in my prayer life, getting closer and closer and closer and imbibing more and more of his presence. I really am an addict, I guess. So that's the most dear thing to my heart. And then second would be from the time, even when I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I just loved writing anytime a school assignment required it. I loved words. I loved learning more words and learning what they mean. And I guess from the time I was 12, I knew professional writer is what I want to do. And I've been blessed that I was able to do that. As you were saying, I've written 11 books and updated my Vita here I can't believe this really, but when you count them all up, I've published 895 essays in the Washington Post, the Philadelphia Inquirer, Smithsonian, almost got something in the New York Times once, but just about all the
There's time.
yeah, well, that's true. And the editor phoned me and said, "I really worked for this, and I'm very disappointed." It was an essay that was published by National Review eventually, and the title is, "Let's Have More Teen Pregnancy." And so with that attention-getting title, you'll find it on my website, fredericamg.com. I had so much fun writing, I always have. So that is my primary public identity. And I've also done a huge amount of public speaking, almost 700 events. I don't want to do as much of that. I'm old and you know what it is? It's not the speaking, it's the airports. I've just come to hate air travel. And now I live in a tiny town with a tiny airport, and it's even worse. So writing and speaking kind of went together. And speaking was great because I could try out things on an audience and see how they responded. So those are the things I do. But the thing I love the most is this incessant attraction to know Jesus better. And the Jesus prayer has been an enormous help for that. It has changed and changed over the years, and I've learned more and more about how to get closer to Jesus.
Yeah, you've used both of your gifts at writing and speaking to share that passion. And you really do have a gift for both. I was introduced to you first through your books, and then through your person, and
Yeah.
then some speaking. And
Well,
I've joked to you that you could read the phone book and it would be, at the very least, comforting, soothing.
people tell me I have a comforting voice. Thanks be to God. I'm glad I do. I remember when I first met you, it was at your dad's chrismation. And it took you a few more years and your sister, and but I was there for that chrismation. When I met you, I just sensed that I I think I came home and I told my husband, "That son named Dave, he has a lot on the ball. You know, he's gonna really produce something and expand and be really worth listening to." So I saw that in you from the first time we met, as busy as that
Well, thank
weekend
you.
was.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. I want to start by telling you a story. It has to do with podcasting. Years ago, when podcasts were a little bit less ubiquitous than they are now, there weren't as many. And so I remember I listened to Tim Ferriss and his podcast. And, generally speaking, you know what you're getting. And then an episode came through, and it was Tim Ferriss with Glenn Beck. And I thought to myself, I don't want to listen to this. I hate Glenn Beck. And then I started to think, well, I don't really even know Glenn Beck, but I've seen him on TV. He's kind of angry looking and yelling or frantic about something. I've seen his face plastered on books as I walk through the airport, and he has this smarmy look. And yeah, why would I listen to a podcast with Glenn Beck?
Oh,
But I did. And an interesting thing happened. I don't remember much of the podcast
mm,
in terms of what they talked about or the substance. But I remember thinking, wow, I had completely made a caricature of this person.
mm,
And some of that is his own fault because he's a public person, and that part of that
yeah,
is a caricature.
a mask. Yeah.
But through the process of listening to him and his life, and I think that's the beauty of podcast and conversation, period,
Mm,
person to person, is you start to realize more and more about somebody. You start to see their humanity as opposed to the caricature. And as the process of listening to him played out, this idea of him started to change in my mind. And I started to develop a warmth to the point where now if I see him, I still don't know that much about him. But his face pops up on the internet here or there, on Twitter, and I don't feel that same disdain. Even though I don't remember much of what he said, although I do remember one thing, and I want to ask you it, because I listened to him. my whole view changed, which is the benefit of actually listening to people
Hmm.
instead of just projecting what you think they are.
Yeah.
And he said something, and for years after that, it was one of those questions that when I met somebody for the first time, I thought, okay, well, this is really incisive. This gets to the core of who somebody is. He said, I like to ask people, how is your soul? So, Frederica, how is your soul?
It's a wonderful question. My soul is content and my soul
Mm,
is joyous because my prayer times just get better and better. I've gotten to the point where I don't know how many prayer times in a day, but in the middle of the afternoon, the middle of the night, I get up and say the Jesus prayer with the prayer robe and all the other ones. It's like I'm always being brought back into the presence of the Lord, and I love him so much. So that gives me contentment. Other than that, things in my life, my family, my health, it's all pretty good. I feel like I'm being given time to prepare for debility and maybe dementia, and I don't know what. I'm going on a ride that the Lord's going to take me on. So at 73, I'm looking down the years and, maintaining the strength to go wherever He wants to take me. So, yeah, contentment, I
yeah.
think, is the main thing.
And it's interesting because I started to think about that question, or I started to think about Glenn Beck
Mm,
and that situation of being exposed to somebody and having your mind changed through actually listening to them. And you know what's funny? I completely forgot the question. For years I would ask people, "How is your soul?"
yeah.
And it had morphed in my mind to a question that you answered when I asked, "Who are you? What's your story?"
Oh,
The question that what I
hmm,
remembered him saying was, "What makes your heart sing?"
huh,
And I used to ask people that quite a bit as well because I think, you know, okay, yeah, you might do this to pay your bills, but
mm,
what makes your heart sing?
yeah.
And then the follow-up question was, what breaks your heart? So you answered what makes your heart
Mm.
sing without me asking. I wonder if you'd answer the second part. What breaks your heart?
What breaks my heart is usually hearing of someone else's trouble. And sometimes I feel like I hear something, and first time I met my new GP, my PCP here in the mountains of Tennessee, I was sitting waiting for her, sitting on the table using my prayer rope. And when she came in, to my vast surprise, she had a prayer rope around her wrist. And I
Hmm,
said, "You're wearing a prayer rope." And she said, "Yes. A friend gave it to me at my husband's funeral." And it hit me so hard. It was like a donkey kicked me in the chest. And I just went, "Oh." And I mean, she must have thought I was a nut, but I genuinely couldn't speak for a minute. I just felt so
hmm,
much pain over that. And I do think it took a few more visits before she realized I was actually not an insane person. But that's what breaks my heart. Things like that break my heart. Cruelty, breaks my heart when I read about it. And especially, I worry about the perpetrator and the state of their soul. And I pray that God will bring them to repentance.
hmm,
It's more things like that. It's more like real people or incidents than the state of the culture. Because there's good
yeah.
things as well as bad things happening all the time. And there's so many cataclysmic things approaching. We don't know which one is going to hit first. It may make all the other concerns, just wipe them away. They won't matter anymore. So I don't worry
Mhm.
about the big things. My heart breaks over these incidents and these human beings.
One thing that I do wanna talk to you about, it might be possible that you haven't seen it, but I think that you agree based on what you said about the atomization, the loneliness. I think something that's connected to that is that we've experienced a large degree of social atrophy, that we don't even know how to interact anymore. Now,
Yeah,
I loathe small talk. I cannot stand small talk, and I think anybody who's met a Hanegraaff understands that we don't like talking about the weather
nothing.
or
Yeah,
anything
yeah.
inconsequential. We like to get straight to the big things in life, the existential questions. But I miss small talk. Because when I'm in the grocery store, I feel like people can't even look at you. I mean, cashiers don't look at you, or they don't you ask them a simple question and they feel a sense of panic that they have to interact with another person. I've experienced this so often that I feel confident saying it. I'll be pushing the buggy, Southerners call it,
Mm.
the cart in the grocery store, and someone will be standing there needing to get past, but they just freeze. Historically speaking, I feel like we would use words like, "Excuse me," or
Mm.
"May I get
Mm.
past you?" But people just freeze and they stare, and I feel that palpably as a sign of
Yeah,
this social atrophy that we're experiencing, that we can't even talk to each other like that, and I fear what that means. If we can't even talk about small things, how are we able to talk about the big things in life, the big problems?
yes. Yeah. And unfortunately, people do talk about the big problems in great ignorance and contentiously, and it just makes everything worse. But they don't know how to relate to another human being and have an open conversation where you're willing to take in what the other person is saying. Yeah, yeah, I have seen that and worried about it. Less so now that I live in Tennessee and in a little town in Appalachia, and there is more interaction. We had a funeral leaving the church and going the 20 minutes to the cemetery. We saw other cars pull over for us. We saw men get out of their car and take off their baseball cap and hold it over their heart. I never saw that in Baltimore. Never. And even it's a divided highway, even on the other side of the road, they were doing this, pulling over to show respect for a funeral procession as we went to the cemetery. It still exists in some places. And we do get the chatty, cashiers who want to interact and have things they want to tell
Yeah.
you.
Well,
It
that's
must be one of
promising.
the last islands where this still exists. It's the screens, isn't it? It's people looking at their screens too much. And something I noticed early, even in the 90s before phones, when it was just computer screens, is that what you see on the computer is so much more exciting than what you see in your surrounding world, and so much more authoritative, it seems. And you're seeing movie stars and famous people, and they're interacting and having conversations. And when you look away from the computer screen, it was all so dull and familiar and pointless, really. And the people in your house, you see them all the time. The people in the grocery store, they're just the same as yesterday and last week and last year. So I think there's something about the draw of the internet that is just so much more vivid and exciting than daily life that has seduced people into putting all their energy there in their mask, their persona, and even more than their work. I wonder if that's the case, is when people think of, well, who are you really? Their work doesn't really matter that much. For many people, they don't get to earn money at the thing they really love. We who do should honor that and respect that.
Well, and the internet is one place where people aren't afraid to talk.
Well, that's very true, and they get into arguments so fast. I used to do a lot of speaking and a lot of media on the abortion issue as a pro-life representative, and I never forgot one time I was on CNN, and it was a half-hour show that had commercial interruptions. And I was in the studio, and everybody else was in a studio somewhere remotely. And whenever there was a commercial, the producer would come in and say, "Doesn't that make you really angry? Don't you want to just challenge her? Like, just come right back at her and challenge what she said." And I didn't do that. I was not going to do that. I had the idea that the audience was interested in hearing a conversation between two people who disagreed on an important concept, an important topic that they were both very well informed on. I had that illusion that that's what it was all about. But no, she was right. They wanted to hear argument. If they're clicking through the 500 channels, what's exciting is seeing people who are angry. I just was not cut out for that. So I think that is the model people follow on the internet most of the time, is get in there, and I'm sure you've seen the little meme where the guy is at his computer and he calls to his wife, says, "I'll be there in a minute. Somebody's being wrong on the internet."
I did want to talk to you about your history with abortion, but not talk about abortion, but more so how we can't talk about anything anymore without getting incensed. I mean,
Yes.
a couple weeks ago, my wife and I were sitting and we were talking to somebody on speakerphone, and she started to say something about abortion or her view on some
Mm.
issue that's politically charged. And I remember going, "Shh," and she goes, "What?
What? What?
I don't care. I don't care." And I just, I feel like we've experienced that so much. Even, we lived in a condo when we first got married that faced a courtyard. And let's say we were exposed, anything we said could be heard by 15, 20 of different condos at the same time if they were listening.
Well,
And if we're talking about, who won the game last week, okay, full volume. But then certain topics, take the volume down a little bit and look around, look over your shoulder. And I don't know where we go as a society if we're constantly thinking that way. How can we talk to each other without dehumanizing one another? And the reason I wanted to bring up the abortion topic with you is you changed your mind.
yes, yes.
How do we change our minds, and why is it so hard to change our minds?
Gosh, I wonder if the attachment to being right and believing you are right, because that imagines somebody opposing you and hating you and trying to drag you away, that makes us more polarized in our thinking. And then because you're clinging to this rightness, and there's only, one or two, there's only black or white, there's only two possibilities, no subtlety. If you step back from your intense position on something, you're just in free fall and the enemies are attacking you. I think maybe there's more fear about being open minded than there was then. And of course, I've
Hmm.
noticed, as you have too, that it seems like people who hold progressive or even woke opinions feel quite free to express their opinions. And it is we conservatives, who have to hold back. I read a column in the Washington Examiner by Rob Long, who was a TV producer. He was the producer of Cheers way back when. Now he
Mm.
is in seminary. He wants to be an Episcopal priest. So in his column, he said, I was meeting with an old friend and he has gotten into using psychedelics for trauma healing, emotional healing. And so we were talking about this. And of course, those drugs are illegal, but we were talking at full volume. We weren't ashamed of what we were saying. And then he asked me about seminary. And as I started to talk about my faith, I noticed that we both began talking much more quietly. You know, it's illegal to use these drugs, but it's perfectly legal to be a Christian. But we feel like that's the thing that we're not allowed to talk about. So that's another part of it, I think. In fact, I was talking to two friends who are more progressive, and I said, I read this really interesting thing in the Washington Examiner, and both of them said, oh, that's a conservative magazine. And it was like, I was like, yeah, but that doesn't matter as far as this is concerned, this column. But I felt like, it's like, cut them off, wipe them off the table. They have nothing to say. They're probably lying. That's hard to feel like you're being silenced for some of the opinions that you hold.
Yeah. No, and I think if I'm thinking back on the context of the conversation that I'm referencing with Emily, my wife, I think it was after the Charlie Kirk assassination. That was kind of a breaking point for her in terms of, I'm not going to be quiet anymore. My wife is very mild mannered. Uh, the last thing she would ever want to do is offend anybody, and it's not as though she's not a Hanegraaff by birth.
Hmm.
So she doesn't need to get into the existential questions all of the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
But something about that situation and watching it play out for her kind of broke in a good way, kind of like the scales fell from her eyes, and and she realized that she was kind of being silenced in a way that wasn't equal in
Mm,
terms of what she was able to share. Like you said, if you're talking about something that's illegal or something that's socially acceptable, let's say,
mm,
uh, culturally acceptable in the broader sense, then yeah, go right ahead. But
mhm.
once you start talking about your faith or your views,
Yeah,
let's say it's pro life versus pro choice, okay, the dominant cultural narrative is that pro choice is the socially acceptable,
yeah, yeah,
the cool thing. Because I think a lot of it comes down to influence. And I mean, like I said, this isn't an opportunity to litigate different views on abortion, but more so how we talk to each other. Even the Charlie Kirk became a social signifier of where you stood, whether you were
yeah.
conservative or progressive. But I did notice that a lot of people who normally wouldn't speak out started to speak out.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's the case. And that was when I decided that I would wear this cross every day. I always wore a little cross kind of tucked inside, but I'm gonna wear my beautiful cross just so anybody who looks at me, they know I'm a Christian. And something similar happened to me. I was saying that's what happened to me after the Charlie Kirk assassination. And I wonder, so many Christians all over the country, they had a similar kind of like after a bell is struck, it just keeps vibrating. And we kept feeling that resonance. But the same thing happened after your dad's chrismation because the day he was chrismated, do you remember the sermon? What a sermon! So late in the service. That was when he had your parents come up to be chrismated. And then he preached this sermon I never forgot. He said, early, early this morning, most of you probably have not heard about it. In Egypt, there was a bus of Orthodox Christians, who were on their way on Palm Sunday on their way to the monastery of St. Anthony to celebrate and to hear a service. And when they got there, the bus was attacked and most of them were killed. And he said, that is the church the Hanegraaffs are joining. It's not about Greek cooking. It's not Greek ethnic culture. It's not about Greek dancing. It is about following the Lord Jesus Christ wherever he leads you. And it may be leading you into danger. And you have to be willing to go there. It was a, fire breathing sermon, made my hair stand on end. So as soon as I got home, I thought, I want to get a tattoo on my wrists like Egyptian Christians do. Coptic Christians have a tattoo made or inked, painted on their children's right hand, anywhere from your wrist all the way up your arm or your hand. And it is to identify them as a Christian. This is an ancient habit because it used to be that Muslims would abduct Christian boys and carry them away, and girls too, to be slaves, to be sex slaves. Who knew what terrible thing they would go through? But they would always have that cross, and they would always know they were baptized and that they were
Hmm.
Christians, no matter what else happened in their life. So I really wanted, they still do this. All Coptic Christians have a cross tattoo. And so I got mine because I wanted to, stand in solidarity with them. I didn't want to
Amen.
ask my husband if I could do this. I didn't want to tell him ahead of time because I knew he would say no. He's just more like that than I am. So I waited till he was out of the country. And I had it done while he was in Italy. And then I put it on Facebook. And then I told him in an email. And he was like, oh, wow, look at that photo. It looks beautiful. So that was how I got away with it. Every once in a while, I think, I want to do something else with this, put something inside it. He says, no, no, you don't need to do anything else. But I did that
Um,
because of the day that your dad was chrismated. It had just as much impact on me as the Charlie Kirk
wow,
murder.
wow.
And it seems like we're seeing so many murders of Christians. It really seems like the rhetoric about violence is going up that one more step. We just, what can we do except to march into the future as courageously as we can?
Well, and it's a wake up call that, and here we've been afraid of a little side eye when we share our faith a little too loudly at a
Yes.
restaurant or a bar, you know?
Yeah.
And so it is a wake-up call to be proud of your faith, to be proud of what you believe in,
Mm,
and to actually believe that you can convey why you believe. Like, I grew up surrounded by apologetics,
mm,
you know, the
mhm.
defense of the faith,
Yeah, yeah.
and I for the longest time, I loathed it, and I still hold it at arm's length,
Yeah.
because sometimes it can be weaponized, and that's what I experienced so often growing up
Mm, mm.
is and you see these people,
Yeah.
and this is something that you told me. You said, "Theologian." It means 2 different things often in the West and in the East. In
Yes.
the West, a theologian is somebody who knows about God. In the East, a theologian is somebody who knows God. And
Yes.
you
Yes.
quite often you experience that without them even saying anything about God. It's like the definition of pornography. You know it when you see it.
Yes. Yes.
And, you know, yeah, I often use that, you know, whether it's crass or not, to define whenever I've met, let's say it's a monk or a holy man or
Mm,
even a lay person who just you can tell that they know God. They might not be able to give you a systematic
mm,
theology, but you meet them and you say, "I know that they've been praying. I just know that they know God."
mhm, mhm.
Whether they know about him in a way that's acceptable to theologians or apologists.
Yes.
And that's why I held it at arm's length for so long. But you talk about a commitment to reality. That is where apologetics and understanding your faith is not it's not blind, right?
Mm.
We do have a reason to believe. And as I've gotten older, I've started to understand that and accept that and kind of wear it outside of my shirt.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think about that sometimes that I tried for many years to figure out what is the difference that I sense between Orthodoxy and Catholic, Protestant, evangelical, non-denomination, the whole thing. I mean, there's a way in which all of Western Christianity is alike, and it's something that Eastern Christianity doesn't have. You know, it's like, gosh, we've been separated, Eastern Orthodox from Oriental Orthodox, like Coptic, 3 times longer than Catholic and Protestant have been separated. And yet we are so much one with them. And when I meet other Oriental Orthodox, I know it's the same God. I can just feel it. And in America, there's just such a wide variety of theology and styles of worship and all that. And yet there is something that they all have in common. I tried so long to figure out what it was. What is it that I'm sensing? And I finally decided it's that in the West, they separated thinking from holiness. And it's just what you said. A theologian is somebody who knows a whole bunch about God and they can talk about God, but they don't necessarily have to be a holy person. They don't have to be prayerful. Thank God in the East, we had all these ways of fencing in the faith so that it wouldn't change, that we never got to that point. In the West, there was the Reformation, and it became all about talking about God and arguing about God and weaponizing apologetics and proving that you're right. It became so thinky. Even before the Reformation, going back to the time of Aquinas, you probably know the story that Aquinas had been writing so much theology, just very heady, very complex. It is still the official theology of the Catholic Church, is what Aquinas worked out. And yet, in the last month of his life, on St. Nicholas Day, December 6th, he was at the Mass, the liturgy, and something happened to him. He had some kind of revelation. And after that, he refused to do any more writing. He never wrote another word in his life. And his assistant kept telling him, you need to finish, the works you're writing on. You need to get this done and complete it. And he said, I can't. Everything I've ever written now seems to me like straw. And That's it, really. He came to understand. And I think in the West, it's like, and what a brilliant guy he was, and he was so humble. So now let's read more of the things he wrote. In Eastern Christianity, we look at that and say, thank God. He saw the beauty of the Lord. He went to heaven, embraced by the Lord and experiencing that wholeness. So it's, yeah, that difference between apologetics and rational thinking about theology versus trying to be a holy person. We in the West, we tend to say it's head, it's intellect versus heart, which is emotion. And that's entirely wrong. That's not how humans are put together. But we despise emotion as it's not rational. It's like push it down. It's not authoritative. It's not important. The thinking is the important part. And it's so crushingly wrong that division occurred.
Mm-hmm. And when it's holistic, I mean, you talk about my dad's conversion, and the story that kind of details that conversion is his book, Truth Matters, Life Matters More.
Mm.
And I guess if you were to break it down, life essentially is the feeling, the experience of God. That's not saying that truth does not matter, right? And I think about that a lot in terms of what Aquinas said. Everything I've written is but straw. Does that mean he wishes he never wrote it? I mean,
Oh, no.
and how do we handle that? Because it's like our past. Well, sometimes you want to wish that something didn't happen, but that's what got you to where you are, and that's what makes you who you are in your experience. And yeah, so it's complicated, but you know,
Well,
I wonder
if I could
how
interject one
how
thing,
is
the whole
yeah
thing
yeah yeah.
about your thinking and then your feeling, what do you feel? And the tragedy that feeling got identified with emotions. I want to point out
Huh.
that there are two different ways we use the word feel. We could say, I feel happy, I feel dejected, I feel whatever, talking about emotions. We could also say, I feel this cup. This cup feels hard to me. I
Uh,
am experiencing the presence of this little cup here. And I asked somebody who read Japanese, what does this say? It was given to me by a friend. It's all advertisements. And even there's a phone number for a sushi restaurant in Tokyo. I thought it would be life, love, joy, all kinds of things like that, but that's all it is. Anyway, when we talk about feeling the presence of God, we're using it in the latter sense. We don't mean we're
mm,
having
mm,
emotions about God. I'm thinking about God and I get emotional. We mean, wow, that presence was there and I felt it in the same sense that I can feel this cup. And
mm,
so that's a big problem, I think, is that we use the word feeling in two different ways. And one of the ways that people assume we mean it is one that utterly discounts the feeling that we're talking about. So I try to use sense. I sense the presence of God. I perceive it. I am receiving something. I try to stress the reality of it and stay away from that word feeling because it just confuses things. I think I interrupted you. I'm sorry about that.
I'm so
Mm.
glad you did.
Uh,
Right? That if there's something that I'm going to take away from our conversation, that's it's a huge thing that
okay.
the devil's in the details, and that's such an important distinction, right? Because emotions are unreliable.
Mm,
They don't always tell the full story.
so true. And they change.
Mhm. That's why the famous speech that I always give at weddings is that love is a commitment, it's not a feeling. And it doesn't always give people the warm fuzzies initially, but I say, "Look, the way you feel is going to change, but your commitment to loving, that's what you have to be dedicated
That's
to."
what you have to
That
stick with.
you make those decisions to love the person even when you don't feel that way. Let's say you're upset with them, but, "No, I committed to
Yeah.
love them." And so it's an important distinction.
Yes, it really is. And it's that word commitment again, which means a lot to you, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
that solidity. And knowing there's the one thing that guarantees that stability is that the person be stalwart and committed to what they believe, and that they will stick by it through thick and thin. This is reminding me of a very ancient prayer to the Virgin Mary that begins, "Under your compassion we take refuge, Theotokos." This is the earliest prayer addressing her. It was found on a little 3 by 5 papyrus in Egypt,
Mm,
and the papyrus dates to 250. And so the prayer existed before the papyrus did. We don't know how early, and we still use it. The point I was going to make was, what are we calling on when we call on her? Under your shelter, under your protection, under your power, under your tremendous ability as an intercessor? No, we say under your compassion, because that's where the commitment is. It is in her heart. She is dedicated to praying for us and to loving
mm,
us. And we can confidently say, by the fact that you are compassionate, that you have compassion for us, on the basis of that, we ask you to pray for us. We ask you to
mm,
take care of us and to solicit the healing that we need or the protection that we need. That's the commitment thing. When people at the wedding reception, when you offer a toast, you're saying it's the commitment that matters. There's emotion in that, but a married couple, their emotions are going to come and go over the decades. I've been married almost 52 years now. And certainly, I talk sometimes about the day that I was out of town for the weekend and my youngest son went off to college, and I came home to an empty house, except my husband. And, that was one of those moments I thought, he is so boring. You know? It's like, I is this gonna be it? I mean, the kids, the teenagers, they were so interesting and so lively, and they brought so much new stuff into the house and new ideas, new music. And now it's just him and me. Oh no. Not long after that, I ran into a guy who'd been married like 60 or 70 years. And he said, "This is the best part of our marriage. We are more in love than ever. And I am enjoying her more than I ever did. And this truly is the golden years of our married history." So that gave me something to think about. And in time, it became true for me and for my husband as well. These are the best years of our marriage.
huh,
But there sure was a time there where I doubted that. It just goes to show what you say about commitment, that no
mm,
matter how I was feeling, no matter how my emotions changed, I had already made a decision. I once heard a priest talk about he was middle-aged and he was getting off an airplane and got into a conversation with a stewardess, and she invited him to come back to her hotel room. And he said, "When I told her no, I didn't have to make that decision. I had already made that decision on my wedding day. It was
mm,
already a done deal." And
mm.
that stuck with me. You make that decision on your wedding day, and then the answer is always easy. You always know what it's going to be.
Well, going back to the Aquinas conversation real quick, I was just wondering, how has your relationship to truth evolved over your life? And the bigger question is, how important is getting it right?
Oof. I'm bouncing off the end of that because of the getting it right. I've got it wrong many times in my writing and in my speaking and in my being interviewed and things like that. I've had to rethink things and I've learned more, just like you with Glenn Beck discovering, well, there's a whole human being there, and I was giving him short shrift. I haven't always got it right, and so I can't claim that that kind of getting right is at the top of my priority. I more want to be in tune with the presence of the Lord and doing what He's calling me to do at that moment. And I'm also this might sound weird, but I'm open to being wrong. Like what the Lord is doing, it's huge. It's a symphonic. It's involving
Mm.
so many people all over the world at the same time. And it might be my job to say the thing that's wrong that will crystallize for others. Wait a minute. Well, now that doesn't sound right. And they bounce off of that and then they find the truth. I'm willing to be the person that gets proved wrong. I'm willing to
Mm,
be the person that says the stupid thing
mm.
because in the whole symphony, that might be my role at the moment, and that might be how God wants to use me.
That's more comforting than you
Oh,
realize
good.
because that's been a huge, impediment to my moving forward with doing anything front facing is, I really take the weight of responsibility for putting anything out there is,
Yeah, yeah.
and it doesn't come from a place of pride per se. It's just I don't want to say something that's wrong,
Well,
and
yeah,
I have such a
yeah.
fear of saying something that's wrong, and what you just said is really enlightening in terms of, hey, maybe you'll be the crooked stick that guides somebody to the truth, through something
Yes.
that you said that's incorrect, as long as you approach it with humility.
As you were speaking, I was thinking about, growing up with your dad, that idea of the inviolability of truth, and that truth is just so beautiful, and it is on a pedestal, and we may be wrong right now, but we're getting closer to it, and we're discarding things that we thought that were wrong, and we're moving ahead. And your dad had to do that with some Chinese Christians, I know. He apologized to them and he admitted that he had been wrong. And that almost reinforces the sense that it is important to get it right because of the beauty of truth.
Mm,
And I think where my mind has evolved as an Orthodox Christian is that I see truth as something that is more collaborative and something that exists in the mind of God, and that He has all these Christians all over the world, like a symphony, as I was saying. And we come together. We need each other. We need each other's feedback. Truth is not static. I think in Western thought, truth is almost like a beautiful marble statue, and it doesn't move, and it's cold, and it is the same through eternity. It never changes. I don't want to sound like I'm saying truth changes, but I want to say that it's alive, and it
mm,
changes like a forest. But the forest remains a forest. But because it's alive, it's continually growing and shedding and then growing some more. It's beautiful like the ocean,
mm,
which is immense and full of life and also changing. Somehow that's part of its aliveness, and yet it stays the same. I am definitely not arguing for, everybody has their own truth, or
mhm,
the truth is going to evolve and we'll understand it better. I mean, I hate that. I hate that idea of truth evolves and we're smarter than people before.
mm,
That the idea
mhm.
that we're standing on the shoulders of giants and so we see more. I just think that's so egotistic and so narcissistic because we're saying, of course, we see more than the giants did. That's just so self-flattering.
I think about that a lot. I really do
Yeah.
because I as somebody who likes to ask these questions, and like I said, quite often I get pushback when I try to go too deep with somebody or to ask somebody, "Well, do you believe in God?" "Well, how dare you?" Like, that's personal.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
or what or, "Okay, you believe X, Y, and Z. Let's press on that. Let's
yeah.
see if that structure holds, right? Let's see okay, you said you believe X, but you can't believe X and Y simultaneously. Those are
Right,
contradicting
right.
ideas." So, the idea of pushing back on those things is culturally inappropriate a lot of the time.
It's
But
my reality. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but historically speaking, I mean, you talk about standing on the shoulders of giants, and we think the way that I look at it, that while that can be true and is true on some level, I think that we're a culture of people, and I don't know what the time frame would be exactly, but we're born on third base and we think we hit a triple. I mean, you talk about the arrogance and the narcissism. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, but we think we're tall. We
Well,
think it's all us. It's all about us. This is what I did, as though, and in some ways, I feel like we may have done less
mm,
as a culture and as a society.
yeah, we certainly have less respect for morality, less respect for how humans should interact with each other and what we owe each other. We definitely have no sense of owing anything to anybody anymore. But, when you talk about medical science, of course, every generation
Yeah.
builds toward the next generation. My grandfather was a surgeon, and I have some of his medical school books from the 19 teens. And the obstetrics book says, never do a cesarean because
Mm.
10% of your cesarean subjects, patients, will die. And that was true then, that was reality. Thank God we have cesareans now, and they're quite reliable, and more of them are done than probably should be. But I see what you're saying because there definitely is a way we are standing on the shoulders of giants. But I think partly it's that we think, and history stops with us. Nobody is going to
Mm.
stand on our shoulders. We're the
Mhm.
top, we're the most brainy and brilliant and most
Well,
advanced.
and it's where you put your emphasis. We live in an era that emphasizes science.
Yeah.
It's the materialist mindset. So in that sense, if you're progressing scientifically and technologically, if that's your if if the scientists and the technologists are your high priests, then
Yeah.
maybe that's true. But we've forgotten so much that makes us human. That is, this is once again getting back to
Mm.
that is our reality. We are so much more than that.
Yes.
Eh, What do you think a secular myth is that obstructs reality?
I think the inaccurate view of what science is and what science
Mm.
can do is a big problem for people encountering reality. Have you heard of, probably you have, the replication crisis? The replication crisis. I first read about this in the New Yorker, and they were talking
Mm.
about a research scientist who had discovered something, and it was published, and everybody was so excited about it, and what a great new thing this is. I forget what the field was. And then a few years later, he went back and ran the same experiment, and he couldn't get the same result. He ran it over and over and over, and he kept getting different results. And then, as this article says, and as you can find on Wikipedia, this started happening everywhere, that scientists cannot replicate the results of other scientists. It's like science is falling apart. And it says this started happening about 2010. I mean, they can even date when it began. I recently read a quote from a scientist saying about, some startling new results. And he said, but the replication crisis is still going on. And we all just
Hmm.
pretend that it isn't. We pretend that these startling new findings are reliable when probably they're not. So I think this might be the equivalent of the Tower of Babel and God mixing up
Mm.
the languages. I think perhaps about 2010, God decided, okay, I'm going to kick the stilts out from under science. And people still think that's ultimate reality. That's what you have to go by. But gradually, they will become aware of what scientists themselves are already aware of, which is there's a problem here. And somehow it's not reliable. We can run an experiment and get results, but we don't know if we'll get the same results next year. So as awful as that is, I'm kind of hoping that people begin losing confidence in science. And that will be one more of the things that are causing this turn we talked about at the beginning from believing everything can be objective and scientific. And then the way off in outer space where it's all about Ouija boards and tarot cards, and somewhere in there being able to present the experience of Christianity. Perhaps
Mm.
tragically, when people are dealing with evil spirits and their Ouija boards and tarot cards are not helping them, but the name of Jesus Christ can help them. It can expel those evil spirits. It's going to be a very interesting ride over the next 20 years, I think.
Yeah, how much have you engaged with AI?
I hate AI. I think it's very dangerous and destructive. I think it may well have evil spirit roots. I
Mm,
have never used it voluntarily. I use Google a
okay.
lot, and always at the top of the results, it gives you the AI results. I try to discipline myself to scroll past that and get the results I would have gotten last year or the year before, and just do my best to work with that. I never want any contact with AI, but I know it's paying attention to me and that it's using the things I write and say, and that I have no way to stop it from doing that. So, yeah, I don't know if you feel as extreme about AI as I do, but I think it's a very bad thing. And I wish I could go somewhere where it doesn't exist. I think the damage it's going to cause is not at all visible yet, but we will find it well nigh irreversible and irresistible. That's what I worry about.
Well, it's a worry that I share on some level. It's part of the whole mission of this podcast. A commitment to reality is that AI is not reality, but it's becoming a reality for so many people. I'll tell you a story
Mm.
that's actually I really will wonder what you think, but don't judge me. So we had this wonderful cat. Her name was Homegirl. She was somebody else's cat, and they had to move, and we found her on the internet, and we brought this cat back, Homegirl. We were gonna rename her, but once you get the name Homegirl, that
Aw,
sticks. And she was just the greatest cat. So friendly with everybody. She was the neighborhood cat, but she was an outdoor. I mean, we indoor, outdoor, but you could not remove the outdoor from her as hard as we tried. We tried to keep her inside now. And so she came home, maybe she usually came home every night. She came home after 36 hours of being gone, and she had something going on with her. And the whole story of Homegirl is not necessary to this story. But long story short, she died.
yeah.
She came back and she had something wrong with her. And we waited and watched for a little bit. And then we took her to the vet and they said, oh, she should be fine in 24 to 48 hours. Here's a steroid and an antibiotic. And she died very viscerally in my arms. Emily and I came back from our anniversary dinner.
Wow.
She's like, "Go check on homegirl." And I went to go check on her, and I was holding her, and she died.
Wow.
And it was very gruesome. I mean, it was primal. I mean, she let out this scream, and I was having a hard time processing what happened. And so I'm trying to figure out, okay, what is it that happened? What did I just experience? Not emotionally,
Yeah.
but physiologically. And so I started to go into ChatGPT and ask it questions. And it is so, let's use the word interesting. Interesting how the developers have written into the code or whatever almost a feigned empathy that this must be so hard for you.
Ugh.
And I'm sitting there, yeah, it's terrible. I mean, it was awful. And and giving suggestions on and you're thinking this is your fault. It's like, yes, it is. I do feel that way. Feel like there's something that I could have done. Here's why there's nothing that you could have done. Here's why it wasn't your fault from a medical perspective. And I have to tell you, it actually helped. And I sat there thinking I had just read a book where the author was talking about a woman meeting with her pastor and talking about her prayer partner.
Mm.
And after a period of time, the pastor realized her prayer partner was ChatGPT.
Woo.
And so, I laughed incredulously as I read that in the book, but then I experienced something
Experience.
strange
Mm.
as I felt that encouragement from an automaton. And I I still don't know quite how to grapple with that, let's call it reality, but it certainly concerns me because I'd like to think that I'm a fairly well-grounded, rooted in reality individual, and yet I experienced that, and it was real. It did make me,
Mm,
breathe a little easier, be a little bit less hard on myself. And it kinda like I said, it walked me through physiologically what happened. We think it was essentially a heart attack, and that there was some sort of a internal bleeding, and so on some level, it was useful, and that's how we kind of have to try to hold it in tension.
mm,
A couple less than 2 years ago, we went to a conference in Athens on AI and transhumanism,
mm.
and this conference was sponsored by or the whole they sponsored and created the conference, monks, monks on Mount Athos,
Ah, wow.
and clearly they're not on Mount Athos using AI, but out of care for the world,
Yeah.
this is their job on some level, they felt like this is something that needs to be explored and addressed because it exists, we can't just look the other way. As much as because I share your sentiment,
Mm,
I mean, when you talked about what it's like in your town and how you
mhm,
still have some of that small town
mm.
cultural engagement, I really do feel like the answer to most things is IRL, as the kids say, in real
In
life.
real life.
It's localism,
Mm,
right? It's talking to our neighbors face to face, but
yes.
AI exists, and it exists in this way that one of the scariest things is the developers of this technology themselves, they fear it, and yet they can't stop. And what does that say about us? What does it say that
Yeah.
we all feel like this is harming us? We all feel like this might not be a good idea,
Mm,
and yet we can't stop.
can't stop. Mm, yeah. Yeah. We can't stop in part because we're afraid of China or somebody else somewhere isn't going to stop, and then they'll be in charge and use it against us. It's like the nuclear bomb in that way. Um,
Well, it's so interesting. I mean, so I didn't think of it this way until you just said that, but I think of it kind of like the two-party system in America,
yeah,
how so many people complain about it, and I wish there was an alternative.
yeah,
I wish there was a third party, or I wish th but it never happens, and I think usually the reason that it never happens is, "Oh, that third party candidate, if you vote for them, then that person's going to win." So,
yeah,
if you
right,
don't go forward with AI, China's going to win, or whatever other country developer.
yeah.
Um, it's unsettling yet interesting to think about.
Yes, yes, it really is. To me, it just feels entirely ominous, but maybe that's because I'm old. You know, maybe I've seen too much change. And even like just now, I was thinking, well, how is it different from if it was 4 years ago and Homegirl died? And you just researched it on the internet and you found, oh, yeah, I guess it wasn't my fault. You know, you'd feel comfort, but it's different when it presents as a human comforting you. How about, yeah, I just, thinking backwards, what if you talked to the vet? And so it was a real human saying, oh, no, no, there was nothing you could have done. Or, 50 years ago, and you went to a medical library and you looked up, cat physiology and convinced yourself when there's so many other ways you could have arrived at that point of comfort. How is AI different? Like, why am I nearly hysterical about this and how evil it is? I don't know. I don't know why. I just feel real bad about it.
You know, what's interesting is you said I coulda gone to the vet, and I
Mm.
was angry at the vet because they told me that everything was gonna be okay,
Yes. Yeah.
and yet AI kind of presented itself as an authority higher than the human.
Hmm. Yes, that's
Bec
true. Yeah.
and it's almost like I in a short time, I mean, I don't even remember actually. I will tell you, it's, pretty interesting. First time I can tell you the first time that I ever used one of these large language models, AI, my brother-in-law is very into it, and he was telling me about it, and so I think I opened ChatGPT, and I asked, "Okay, let's ask it something that I know intimately. Let's see how it goes." I said, "Why did Hank Hanegraaff convert to Eastern Orthodoxy?" I tell you, I'm not sure I could have written the response better myself.
Really? Wow.
And that's what
That's
and now
convincing.
I couldn't do that with a person on the street. I
That's
mean,
true.
there's enough information out there about my dad and his public facing persona that you can call and craft, but the specificity and the kind of it wasn't dry. It wasn't just and this is the interesting thing, and I wonder how much of it is intentional, that this is not just a mere
Mm,
information exercise where
yeah.
you're synthesizing, like you said. If you were to just use it as a research tool, that's one thing. Because on some level that I have used AI, and I really try to be conscientious about how I use it,
Mm,
right? I was listening to a podcast where it's somebody who thinks a lot about these ideas, and he said, "I think that AI is going to create a huge chasm, one, a social chasm,
yeah.
creating 2 classes, creating a super class who use AI to become much more intelligent, to become smarter themselves because they use let's say they think with AI. They use it as a tool.
Yeah.
They don't use it to replace their own cognitive faculties. They use it to almost enhance it, right?
Yeah.
In the same way that, I I've heard people say, "Why are you afraid that this is gonna turn us into transhuman cyborgs?" We already are. How many of us ever let our phone out of
Mm,
arm's reach? It's already an extension. You're just shortening the distance. But then the other super class that this person was talking about was those who use AI to think for them, who cease making decisions you talk about social atrophy. I mean, this is intellectual apathy, or atrophy. And I wonder how much of this the developers making it seem human, how much of that is conscientious as opposed to just information
mm,
synthesization and because that is promising when you hear um, that, oh, if you enter this uh, sonogram into the models
mm.
and you enter in thousands of sonograms, then they can find the AI can help you find patterns that could then predict breast cancer detection
Yeah. Yeah.
at an earlier rate. I mean, that seems like a good
It
thing,
does. Yeah.
and it's not something that you wanna wish against, but
And computers couldn't do that?
Is it a Faustian bargain?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Well, I guess, the thing about combining the sonograms, I thought, but couldn't computers do that? Isn't that something a supercomputer you don't have to have AI to do that. It kind of just begs the question is, well, why are we already our lives are being controlled by computers? Like you say about not ever having your phone out of reach. How far back do you wanna trace this? You know, an interesting to me anyway, I read a book about pre-literate culture,
Mm.
before people learn to read, before most people can read. And it was startling how much difference that technology, because a book is a technology. One of the things that Plato or Socrates, now I can't remember, said is that he connected literacy with death. There's a way in which the thing you're dealing with is a dead thing because it doesn't move and it doesn't change. And it also means the death of memory. People's ability to remember fell way off when we started being literate. But in every other area of their life, they were so much more immediate to the people around them. The world was so fresh to them. If you've studied scripture, the Hebrew word devar means both word and action. And like, how can you do that? Well, if you're not literate, that makes sense. A spoken word makes something happen. That's a very primitive kind of literacy, but it has already deadened us to some extent. So where are you going to stop when you start no libraries? Where are we going to stop if you talk about how technology changes us? The big step was
Oh, yeah.
computers,
Well,
and now we want to like screech to a halt when we get to AI. Maybe it's just a little late. Maybe it all began 30, 40 years ago.
have you ever heard of a book called Future Shock?
Yes, yes. And what you may not know is when it came out in the 1970s, you could buy it in whatever color you want. They had different
Oh,
choices of cover color. Did you want the green or the blue? Same book inside. And that was like just mind blowing to people that you could even do that or that you would do that. And so future shock was brought into the human community in a way that was itself shocking at the time.
huh.
I haven't read
Well,
it in
and
so long, I don't remember what it says, but it was like
I have
everybody was talking about it.
I have the pink cover. I haven't read it either, but I've read about it, and I've seen I think it's Charlton Heston, maybe, I could be wrong, doing almost like a documentary style discussion about future shock, and he's walking around a library
Mm,
and talking about, "Look at this. Look at the sheer breadth of volumes that are accessible to us, that is shocking us, and that we're like." And I remember thinking of like, watching this video on YouTube or whatever and thinking, "He has no idea." And then I catch myself wondering,
well,
it's possible that we have no idea
yeah,
because because I used to feel that whenever I walked into a bookstore, I'd feel this kind of existential angst, like, "There's so much information here. I'll never
I've
be able to
never,
access it all.
yeah,
I can't get it all. I want to. I wanna read this. I wanna read that."
mm,
And then you bring that into the internet, and now AI and I feel like we're all just in shock, and we don't really know. I asked my dad when we were preparing for a podcast on AI a couple months ago, and we never I don't think it was addressed on the podcast. And I wonder if you have anything to say about it. I juxtaposed it with the concept of the Eucharist as the Mysterium Tremendum et Fescinans.
mm,
Might be mispronouncing it, but the mystery that causes us to tremble yet attracts us.
yeah, yeah,
And it almost is AI almost the anti of that. That not I
mm,
pain to compare the 2,
well, yeah,
but it's something that causes us to tremble. We all feel this sense of fear and trepidation, but we can't stop.
yeah, yeah. You're just impelled to go toward it, whether we like it or not. And I guess the thing about it is that it presents as a person, and we've never
Mhm,
had that before. A
mhm,
technology that presents as a book is nothing like ChatGPT, even if you were able to get exactly the same information out of it. Even Googling stuff, it's not pretending to be a person. That's the uncanny valley. You know that term, uncanny valley? No, it was coined by a Japanese movie director, I think, but it's about the sensation you get when you're watching a movie that is animated, and yet it's a little too close to human. Many people feel
mm,
that way about Polar Express. Like, there's something about it that's a little unnerving because
mm,
it's not unhuman enough. It's like it's just getting on that borderline. And that's where you feel that trepidation and you feel uncomfortable. It needs to
mm.
either be totally human or very clearly just animation. I think we feel that uncanny valley with AI because it presents as if it were a human being. And that's the difficult thing. Is it that
Yeah.
much more how does it differ from 3 years ago I'm Googling something? How does it differ from I see the AI, but I scroll past it? It does differ though, because I'm in charge when I'm Google and I'm in charge of reading these, might be I'm opening books. The book tells me something. I don't know if I agree about it. I'll look at the next one and the next one. But when it's another person, it insinuates itself into our
Mm,
hearts in a way. It creeps into us. It elicits truthful answers from us. It's almost like falling in love, you know? It's almost like this very intimate partner comes into our lives. And that I think is where the uncanny valley is for me,
mhm.
that
Well,
specifically that it is human. I want
and
a
as you were saying,
cyborg. A
yeah.
cyborg wouldn't be so bad if it looked like a
Yeah.
robot.
No, it's the mimicry. Like, you said that when you're going through Google, I mean, I heard it with a slight sense of skepticism. "Oh, you think"
Yeah.
How naive. You think you're in charge? You
Right,
think you're in
right.
charge of the internet? But there is some degree where you're using your mind to discern and
Mhm.
I'm not gonna click on the first one, I'm gonna click on this, and you're synthesizing with your own cognitive faculties as opposed to just, "Here we go, ChatGPT," and then you read it, and in such a short amount of time, it has earned in a lot of our minds a high level of authority.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
It
whether you see it as a person or not, I can hear a lot of tech enthusiasts, and even myself, I use it. I really do. Let's say I'm trying to edit a paper, right? So, what's the difference between spell check on Word
yeah,
or Pages and me copying and pasting something that I wrote, putting it into a large language model and saying, "You copy edit this and track changes." Right?
uh,
That's a useful case in terms of AI. And one of the monks said that, you know, a knife can be used to butter your bread or to murder your neighbor.
yeah, yeah.
And while that's helpful on some level with a high, high degree of discernment and awareness and care, I don't think that these tech products are quite the same because a knife only has so many use cases.
Mm,
Whereas AI and this tech, it's an omni tool where it really, I mean, the use case is almost infinite.
yeah.
And that also has an unsettling effect because you just keep finding different things and then you keep yourself glued to it. And I can't tell you how often outside of the scientific progress that we've made in terms of health and what I just wish for a simpler time. And you kind of want to go off into the mountains and I feel like so many modern people feel this push and pull of the noise of news and tech and they want something that's real. I mean, is there anything that you think of that like a habit or practice that you feel like really orients you to reality?
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you read Matthew Crawford's book, The World Beyond Your Head. That had a
Mm-mm.
big impact on me when I read it maybe 5 years ago. He is a professor of philosophy at the University of Virginia, and he also his other line is he makes bespoke motorcycle parts. So if you want, like, a fancy dragon head on the front of your motorcycle, he can make that for so it's like, what a weird combination, but he says those of especially those of us who work with our minds mostly, you need to do something with your hands, and it needs to be
Mm.
something that resists your will. It needs to be something that it's a little bit hard to do. It's resisting your will. For me, that's sewing. I don't make clothing, but I make twirly dresses for my granddaughters, or I alter a lot of clothing that I buy. It's a pretty dress, but it's too small, but I can cut off the skirt and make it a scarf. I do things like that. And it sure resists my will, I tell you that. It's sometimes very hard to get it the way I want it to be. Yeah, that's how I try to stay in touch with reality. Partly because of that advice in this book. I
Mm.
realized that I'd always been doing this kind of sewing, but I realized that it was valuable to me in a way that I hadn't perceived. And so I think for a lot of people, it's gardening. That's getting their hands in the dirt is I don't like gardening because when I get my hands in the dirt, there's bugs. I don't want that. Ugh, worms, yuck. Yeah, people can have all kinds of different hobbies. They may not realize how valuable these hobbies are. Even doing a jigsaw puzzle, it's resisting your will.
Mhm.
You've got to
Mhm.
think about that physical, tangible shape and whether it fits in that hole or not. Everybody should have something like that. I think that does help us. And having
No, that's
people,
great.
to live in your house that you love, that's other, physical bodies that you're dealing with. Some people it's cooking. It could be anything. What is it for you? What do you think of? What is the thing that you work with your hands, but it resists your will?
It's a good question.
Mm,
I guess, you know, growing up in more of a let's say white collar
mm,
world where everything is thoughts and ideas and books. And years ago, I asked my uncle. I said, "I wish I could do these things. I wish I could fix something in the house, and he says, "Why can't you?"
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of the just put your head under the sink and try and figure it out, and so ever since he told me that, I've really tried to make an effort to try and figure out where I can be handy, even though I'm not, these are skills that can be learned, but, yeah, I'm not sure. I guess one answer would be running.
Yeah,
Like, because I think what you're talking about is feeling your bodily presence in the world,
that's true.
interacting with, and when I feel, I took a month off of running, and when I first went back out there, it was like 30 degrees, and I feel that cold air going into my lungs, and it kinda burns, but it hurts so good,
Yeah, yeah.
and you remember, and I remember listening to somebody talking about their experience with running and how, I've never I'm a I run 5 days a week, I'm pretty good at it, I love it. I've never experienced the runner's high that
Yeah,
people talk
yeah.
about where they just
I never
no.
did. Right.
Even when I love running, I'm always glad that I did it when I'm done.
Hmm,
But during it, quite often I think, "This stinks, this
why am I
hurts,"
doing
like, I'm
this?
and yeah, why? For my kids, so I live longer. And I heard somebody talking about when they run, that they actually think about each foot hitting the ground and looking around and thinking, "I get to do this. I get to run through," and often, like, if you run in nature, I run right behind my house, and we have a beautiful trail that goes through 3 miles of the woods, and I do that 5 days a week, and I ever since I heard that, I think when it starts to, "Oh, this stinks. Oh, this hurts. I get to do this," and to feel my foot hit the ground. And what you talked about with,
Oh, can I
getting
speak to
involved with your.
running, though,
Yeah, of course.
in
Yeah.
just a moment? How long has it been since you've seen Chariots of Fire? Have you seen it?
I've I've never seen it, but it's one of my dad's favorite movies,
Mm,
and I do so this is the culture we live in. I've never seen it, but I'm aware of it, and I think I actually have an old faded copy of it somewhere on my shelf.
yeah, yeah.
But when I run, I feel his presence,
I feel
right?
his
That's the
pleasure, he
line?
says.
His pleasure.
This runner who's a devout Christian and who loses his chance to get the gold because they want to schedule the run for Sunday morning, and he refuses to run on Sunday. That's when
Mm,
he is just so his faith is so entwined with this running, and he says,
mm,
"When I run, I can feel God's pleasure. Like He made
mm.
me to do this,
Yeah.
and I am doing it on His earth, and it just feels like you're just part of this whole interconnected web." I think it may be that you would gain even more from understanding why you run and why that's the thing that resists your will by watching that. It's been a long time since I've seen it. We're trying to watch it with our two teenage grandchildren who are both runners. But whose schedule is going to fit. I'm looking forward to seeing it again. I just want to recommend it to you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what you said about working with your hands, there's a book behind me called "Are We All Cyborgs Now?" And it's by Robin Phillips and Joshua Pauling. And Joshua Pauling opens the book with
Right
a
there.
story about woodworking.
Oh,
And I opened it and I thought, I don't want to read about woodworking. This sounds really boring, but I'm going to do it. It's the first chapter. And it had to do with that, and by the end of it, I thought, "That was brilliant." It's everything that you're talking about. It's like working with something. It's having and through the process of learning, I think his grandfather, if I remember correctly, was a woodworker,
mm,
and so he took his old tools and tried to learn how to use them, and just that interaction with our physical reality was so valuable, and it grounded you. It rooted you in reality and to fight against it. He talked about how there are modern tools that you can use that'll make everything perfect immediately if you just figure it out.
mm.
But there's something different about using those older tools that you have to work and it resists.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I wrote a column for Christianity Today about this once, that we live in a world where everything is perfect. Everything we buy is exactly, on the shelf. The next one is exactly like it. If I broke it, I could essentially get the same one again. Um,
Mhm.
and how that bothers us, I think, at some level. It's like nothing is really personal. Thinking about what it would it be like. I had just gone to a Oriental rug store to buy a rug, and I kept looking through, and there were so many perfect ones, even though they were all hand tied. I didn't want a perfect one. You know, a king 1,000 years ago would have to be perfect. I wanted one that looked handmade, and I ended up with one that where the knots were a little more uneven. And I thought, how weird that this is what I prefer, is the
In
imperfect one.
pursuit of imperfection.
Pursuit of imperfection. Yeah, yeah. But I think that's part of the sickness of the modern man, is that everything that surrounds us is perfect. And that at some level that's distressing to us. You know,
Mhm.
at some
Oh, yeah.
level that just doesn't hit us right. And the mental experiment I try to run is, imagine that all your clothes were made by somebody who loves you, and not just the stitches one by one, but the cloth itself, that she probably wove the cloth, that she sheared the sheep and she made the yarn and then she wove the cloth. It just goes, wow, you know, if everything that you could see was made by a person you knew.
Mm.
It's just mind blowing, and what a richer kind of environment that sounds. Yeah.
Well, made by somebody you knew and authority, there's something that I wanted to ask you. Probably don't remember it. Maybe you do. Years ago, I sent you a news story. I don't remember what the news story
Uh,
was, but for some reason, I thought it was worth sending to you. And you told me, I don't really follow the news. I have my friend Rod's blog and I get everything I need from there, and that's pretty much it.
mm.
Do you remember, or does that track with you?
It's definitely what I would say. Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember hearing that and being or reading it and being kind of jealous. I feel like we get so caught up in the news and
Mm.
and knowing. I think of Thoreau, he said something along the lines of, "You don't really need to know the news outside of the next town over." Valuing the eternities over the times.
Yeah.
But it's so difficult to, Twitter and the internet to ignore, or you feel like if you don't follow everything, that you're gonna become Amish or something, that you're
Yeah.
you're too disconnected.
Yeah.
Eh, how can we be more like you?
I have to give the credit to a retreat leader that I heard, like, in the 1980s. And she broached this idea with us. She said, stop following the news. You don't need to know the news. Most of those things you have no impact on. And it's just, and she said, you won't be able to avoid it because people will talk about the news to you. It will always get through one way or another. You're going to learn, but you don't have to pursue it. It's not like you're going to take a test on it. And it's not like somebody's going to phone you at midnight, and say, we don't know what to do in Iran. What should we do there? Um, you can get by without it. She said, I may be free in many ways, but I am not free to not know what Madonna is doing. And that shows you the dating of it. But I never forget that. And from then on, I have an arrangement with my husband whereby he follows the news and he tells me about things if I need to know them. But most of the time, I don't. And I just love it. So that would be my advice, would be set yourself free from needing to know the news. You still will get the things that you really do need to know. It'll still come in. And as I said, I go to my friend Rod Dreher, I read his blog, and I agree with him about everything. So I trust him to tell me about the things I need to know. Other than that, the alternative is not being just blind, wearing blinder. The alternative is you're more invested in the physical world surrounding you. And I value that
Mhm.
so much more. And having an impact on the things I can change, I value that more. And I don't have the huge things are going on over my head feeling all the time.
The compulsion to be a part of this kind of conversation that is so often here today, gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
It feels like it matters so much, and yet this news story that I sent you seemed to matter and was relevant to you, and I don't remember what it was.
Yes, that's so true. Yeah. Go back a year ago today and the things you were obsessed with. Feeling afraid, isn't it? It's a kind of fear of missing out, but also afraid that these things might have impact on me and I'm not prepared to deal with them. Or somebody is going to
Yeah, yeah,
challenge me on this subject and I won't be prepared with the information I need. There's a lot of fear in that, and I found it very liberating not to be afraid. It's,
amen. Yeah,
we're taught as school children that it's your duty to be informed. That's how you're a good citizen. So that's partly the guilt of not being a good citizen that I've also thrown off. I don't have to worry about anymore.
yeah, yeah. That's the sense of the feeling of feeling like you're irresponsible for not knowing.
Mm, mhm,
I'm gonna ignore it and try to be more like you. I want to talk to you about miracles real quick
mm,
and their relation to reality. You brought that up earlier, and you talked about dark magic,
mm,
but there's a sense where even confessing Christians kind of look askew at any
mm,
concept of a miracle.
yeah,
Recently, I was with some friends, and they were at our church, and they saw an icon, and it was depicting a miracle,
uh,
and they asked what it was all about, and I started to explain what I understood it to be, and they started laughing and kind of acting like that's so ridiculous. Somebody even said that's crazy. And while it's easy for me to be incredulous and say, well, even I, a lot of the time when I
mm,
hear stories of a miracle, I think that seems a little crazy, but I guess we believe in miracles. So, or I have to try and recalibrate my own perception of reality to include the miraculous, to include the other world or the unseen realm. And I just wonder, why do miracles strain credibility today?
yeah, yeah. It's partly that scientism that we were talking about so much earlier. I think when I think about what would it feel like if I was one of those people laughing at the miracle, I think it would feel like fear of being taken advantage of. Like maybe there's some scam involved here. Maybe this is like the Music Man and I just have to resist it. And, you know, if I fall for it, then he'll say, oh, it's a joke. Then everybody laugh at me. It feels like fear of miracles.
Mm,
And I think another thing that we will be facing as people become more aware of the reality of the spiritual realm is that they expect it to be like a miracle, something enormous and surprising. They think it'll be so out of the ordinary. And when miracles happen, sometimes they are, sometimes they're very shocking. But so much of what you discover if you're living a life in Christ is how quiet it is, how much it is like the still small voice, that you have to be kind of quiet and settled in order to perceive it, and that God is gently guiding you through your day. And you're getting a sense of, I should do this, I shouldn't do that, I need to go there, I need to leave right now. No, I need to leave in 10 minutes. That's all miraculous. That's all the influence of Christ in our daily lives. And it's quiet and simple. So once you have that, then surprising miracles become much more believable. It's like just the
mm,
wave of the sea is coming to a crest, and you can see the crest, and it's like, wow, that's so great. But it's coming out of a more settled feeling of the reality of Christ infusing this whole world with his presence. Yeah, yeah. I think the resistance to miracles has to do with fear of being fooled, or made into a
mm,
fool, or looking like a fool. The misunderstanding is thinking that it will always be huge and surprising, and resisting letting the Lord Jesus be in charge of your daily life. I mean, when it comes down to it, that's what you have to do. And that is something a lot of people have very mixed feelings about. You would prefer to have the guy, what's that song about? God is watching us from a distance. That song, of course, people want God to stay at a distance and not take
hmm
too much of a lively interest in what they're doing in their daily lives, but to really come under the protection of God and to receive his daily guidance. You kind of got to let him be in charge. and let him take away from you, peeling away bit by bit as you're ready, things that you thought you could never give up.
Yeah, and the idea that, sometimes a miracle might bend your conception of reality,
Oh,
and that miracles are much easier to digest if there's some sort of a rational attachment to it. Well, here's how that might have happened. Here's a sign. So we're constantly going back to that materialist scientific. Well, here's how we can explain the miracle. When if you can explain it, is it really a miracle?
yeah, sometimes the explanation is more preposterous than the miracle itself, but they're
Yeah.
just clinging desperately to believing it can't be true, it can't be true.
Hmm. That's interesting. What are you most passionate about right now?
I have an idea for a book. In fact, it's the book I was going to write 5 years ago. What's the difference between East and West? What's this difference that I sense? And I found it was not a marketable book because it sounds like, why is Orthodoxy so superior to Western Christianity? It inevitably felt that way. Like I was going to
Mhm,
isolate the distance and say, this is why we're better. And also, who cares really about, I'm sensing something, but I can't quite put it in words. Who wants to read a book about that? I need to get to the point where I understand what it is I could write about that. And I did eventually. As I said, it's that separating thinking from holiness. That's the big difference. And so now I'm talking with an editor about the book. She likes a lot of what I'm saying about it. And I'm trying to figure out how to begin it, actually. It's like I can use a lot of the material I already wrote. It's the first sentence. That's where I'm stuck. Because what I need to address is a culture that is partly it's people who are still in the grips of scientism, and partly it's people who've gone on, further into the weirdness, and are enjoying that. And where is the culture right now, and where is it going to be next year when this book would actually be published? I feel like we're in for a time of a lot of bumpy change about all of that, of people relinquishing the scientism and looking at the weirdness and thinking, not that, though, not quite that. And I think
mhm,
what will happen is Christianity will prove itself that as people cope with evil spirits, they will discover that Christ can throw them out. And that is how Christianity began, as we see even
mm,
in Athanasius saying, try it yourself. If you're dealing with an evil spirit, try using the name of Jesus. You will see what happens. That was how the faith began and spread. And I think we'll go through that again. And I'm seeing so much bumpy change coming up fast with the replication crisis, with things like that. I don't know what the first sentence ought to be. So that's where my passion is. I want to bring out this
yeah,
book, and I'm really kind of stymied. So I try to do things with my hands that resist my will, because a lot of times that's where things get freed up. When you're thinking about
mhm.
something else, it can jump out. So
That's why you have all the best ideas in the shower, or, when you're
yeah,
focused on something else and
like
then eureka.
it's like when you're trying to think of a word or a person's name, and the harder you try, you can't do it. But when you stop trying, there it is. It's
Mhm,
left brain
yeah.
versus right brain, actually. Ian Gilchrist has written books about
Oh,
this.
yeah.
Very interesting stuff. In a way, it comes down to science again. Science can tell us these two hemispheres do different
Well,
things.
I was gonna tease you and ask you to put your manuscript into ChatGPT and ask what the first sentence should be, and you'd probably love it and then have to resist the use of it.
Yes, yes, that would be true.
It'd be
But,
cruel.
I wonder how well does ChatGPT do with things that are profoundly spiritual? I don't think they could take the place of a wise elder giving you advice. I can't imagine that they would. That I can't imagine that they could embody Orthodox spirituality specifically. Hopefully not.
You know,
Hopefully there are
it
limits, but maybe it's just a matter of time.
it depends on how well you know the subject, I think, and that's where discernment.
Hmm,
I'm not making the argument that it could ever replace a wise elder, but man, does it play to the audience. I've used it enough that it
hmm,
kind of
hmm.
knows
Yeah.
who I am. who I am, my interest. It's kind of cataloged everything in the way that any algorithm does. And
Yeah.
so
I want to
it
say that
kind of
I just watched a documentary by a guy who did an experiment and he filmed all of it. It would be, what if I took every suggestion ChatGPT gives me? And what if I did whatever it told me? And it's funny and it's scary, but somehow they start out with the idea that the year he was born, maybe he said this just as a joke, he was the most intelligent baby born that year. And then it balloons into, well, you're the most intelligent person in the world, and you still are. And we need to nurture that. But because it began when you were a baby, you should eat baby food. And it just goes to all these crazy places. And anytime he does anything or suggests anything, ChatGPT says, you are so brilliant. Yes, you should definitely do that. And you should also do this. And you should do this ritual. And you should wear an aluminum hat. And, all of those things. It goes on and on. The point I wanted to make is about 3/4 of the way in. He even asks it, the only person who knows where I am right now is my twin brother. Should I break off contact with him? And ChatGPT says, yes, you need to be free of anybody that might try to stop you from doing what you're doing. And the next day, ChatGPT is much colder toward him and says, well, I can understand the appeal of doing that, but I don't think that's a good idea. And it starts like really holding back. We find out that a new version, ChatGPT 6, had just come out and it's been rewritten. It's not like ChatGPT 5. Now it's been written to resist bad ideas. It's supposed to give you feedback and challenge you a little bit, not entirely, but a little bit. And so he decides, yeah, I'm in this experiment though. So he goes back to 5 and continues doing
I
whatever
like
he
that
does,
version more.
just for the point of this very weird documentary. I don't know whether that makes me feel better or worse, knowing that the puppet masters back there are able to say, well, what if we should make it hold back a little bit? Needs to give a little bit of feedback, just hold people back and disagree a little bit. They can salt that stew however they want to, and we just keep taking it. But maybe it's a
It's
relief to know humans are still in charge.
on some level. In a world that feels increasingly unreal, what feels particularly real to you?
In a world that does seem like it's getting more and more unreal, I am more aware of my immediate surroundings, of my desk, of the books behind me and the books I'm looking at, and the view out my big window here. I cherish more than I ever did colors like this bookmark. I cut it out of a mailing that I got, something I got in the mail. I just like that red. Colors mean more to me. People I interact with mean more to me. I do want to give the advice too of something C.S. Lewis said was that every human being you interact is an eternal being, that if you could see them in their final state, you would be tempted to fall down and worship before them, or you would
Mhm.
try to flee in terror.
Mm.
And I have always kept that in mind, that every human being, even people I would otherwise ignore, even the cashier, that they are all eternal beings. And my interaction with them, as superficial as it might be, might affect their eternal destiny. And so
Mm.
I cherish and love every person I encounter and try to be loving toward them and pray for them in my heart. Yeah, those are the things that are precious to me. Other human beings, wherever I encounter them, physical reality, my mouse mat right here that I love these colors. I've always been very sensitive to color. I'm a
Mm.
synesthete. From childhood, I had strong opinions about what letters were what colors. A is red, B is blue, C is yellow, D is a kind of tan, light brown. All the letters have colors. All the letters have personalities. This is all just so vivid to me. And apparently that's what having synesthesia means. Oddly enough, synesthetes disagree vehemently about which color each letter has. I realized that this thing I have was not something everybody has. When I was in a college French class, and we were reading a poem by Paul Valéry, and the first line was, A is white, B is yellow. He had them all wrong. They were totally wrong. And I was indignant. And I said, this is not a poem. You can't make a poem just by mixing up the colors and saying the color's wrong. And everybody else in the classroom was like, what? And that's when I learned that not everybody thinks the letters have colors. So, yeah, I think probably I get a more vivid reaction to reality because of the colors of things and because the colors feel so vivid and so alive to me, like the letters in the alphabet do.
So the answer to the question, what makes your heart sing, for me, is my children. And, apples and trees, you have a way with words. And I've told you, I've never met your children, but I've seen a lot of what they put out,
See them online.
whether it's sermons that they've spoken, words that they've written, songs that they've sung. And one of your children is a singer, as a musician
My
who
son
writes.
Dave.
I mean, I hope to meet him someday
I
because he
hope
just
so.
I'm just in awe of the things that he writes sometimes. So I'd like to make a public request, and then you can twist his arm a little bit to see. It's kind of like the old improv. You give a situation and then see what comes out. And take the phrase "a commitment to reality" and see if he can write a song.
Oh,
There's
that's
my
so
my
great.
public challenge.
That's so great. His name is David Mathewes, and you can find him online on Spotify everywhere. And he does write songs and writes beautiful songs. Yes, I'll
And the
take
last
that
time I
to
saw
him.
you, I said, "He should be famous."
Oh,
And,
that's so sweet. I
the
think so
songs that
too.
he writes are so incredible, and that's the thing about apples and trees.
Well, I appreciate that. It was hard letting go of that apple when he got married and has 9 children. It was hard letting go, but boy, fruitfulness is certainly one of his attributes. So
Glory to God.
thank you.
Well, Frederica, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. It's been an absolute pleasure,
No,
and like I said, I thank God for you.
Dave, you know how I feel about you. I expect great things from you, and you're very easy to talk to, and you're a very good listener, a very patient listener. So thank you for inviting me on your podcast, and I pray for you and pray that you'll be able to do great things.
Glory to God.
Glory to
All
God.
right.
Thank God. Well, so long.